Thank you. And I'm going to start by telling you that it was common in the age of the English Regency for a woman's name to tell you everything you could possibly need to know about her. If she was unmarried, she was Miss. If married, Mrs. If unmarried, she bore her father's name, and if married, her husband's. Therefore, when I tell you my name is Miss Jane Austen, that ought to tell you everything you could possibly need to know. And yet somehow that does not satisfy. All my life, people keep asking the same questions. Why did I never marry? Was I ever in love? How could I have written so knowledgeably about love if I never was in love? And again, why did I never marry? There seems to be this preoccupation throughout time that no woman, however accomplished, can be considered really complete without a man. But the facts of my life are well enough known. I was born in 1775, one of 8 children of a clergyman, never married. I completed 6 novels in my life, working at a little table in a common sitting room with family members traipsing in and out. There was a squeak in the sitting room door, and I insisted that it not be fixed because it warned me when anyone came in so I could hide the papers. I was 36 years old when my first novel, Sense and Sensibility, appeared. Those are the facts. Those should be enough. And yet somehow people still want more. And it's amusing to me because that more information about who I was, what I thought, what I believed, that information is all there, you know, in the books. If you want to know me, you really need to know the books and the characters. And how flattering that so many have decided that one character, above all others, must be me. Can you guess? Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. Now, I will freely admit similarities between us abound. Elizabeth loves walking, so do I. Elizabeth is a great dancer. I like to think I am. Elizabeth Bennet has a dear sister, Jane, just as I had my beloved sister, Cassandra. Cassandra has always been my best friend, my confidant, my sounding board. My mother once said, if Cassandra decided one day that she wanted to have her head cut off, Jane would insist upon sharing the same fate. And oh yes, Elizabeth Bennet speaks her mind. She stands up for herself. Her courage rises with every attempt to intimidate her. I love her verbal wit, that jousting repartee. Well, if you've never read Pride and Prejudice, perhaps I can give you an example. When, at one point, Elizabeth receives a proposal of marriage from the man she believes has separated her sister from the one man that she loves, the odious Mr. Darcy, here is how she responds to his proposal of marriage. In such cases as these, it is, I believe, the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the feelings expressed. It is natural that obligation should be felt. And if I could now feel gratitude, I would thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you certainly have bestowed it most unwillingly. I'm very sorry if I'm occasioning pain. It has been most unwittingly done, and I hope will be of short duration. The feelings which, you tell me, have long prevented the acknowledgement of your regard can have little difficulty in overcoming them. I might as well inquire why, with so evident a desire of offending and insulting me, you chose to tell me that you liked me against your will, against your reason, and even against your character? Was this not some cause for incivility if I was uncivil? But it is not merely that on which my objection is based. You dare not, you cannot deny that you have been the means of ruining, perhaps forever, the happiness of my most beloved sister. You cannot deny you have been the means of separating them and plunging them both into the most abject sorrow. But it is not even that on which my dislike is founded. Long before that occurred, my opinion of you was determined. From the very beginning, from the very first moment, I may almost say, of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressed me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain for the feelings of others. I had not known you a month before I was convinced you were the last man on earth I should ever be prevailed upon to marry. I must confess, I do think Elizabeth Bennet as delightful a creature as ever appeared in print. And how I can ever tolerate those who don't like her, I don't know. Now, Elizabeth is not perfect. If you've read Pride and Prejudice, you know Mr. Darcy is the perfect man for her. But she knew that a marriage with what was, at that point, a lack of respect and esteem is no marriage at all. Elizabeth's refusal to marry a man simply for his wealth and social status does echo one experience in my life. Harris Big Wither is the man who came closest to ever persuading me to marry. He was the heir to a very large estate, many down house. And his family was dear friends of ours. We had known them for years. In 1802, Cassandra and I visited Many Down House. I was 27. He was 21. He was wealthy. I was unmarried. He proposed. I accepted. The entire family was delighted. It would bring financial security to the Austens at last. That was a long night. Very long. 12 hours of vacillating. Do I marry for money, or do I refuse for lack of love? There was nothing essentially wrong with Mr. Big Wither, nothing unsuitable or unctuous. If you read Pride and Prejudice, he was no Mr. Collins. Well, a slight stutter perhaps, but that's all. A great many would have taken him without love. But I withdrew my acceptance the next morning. Cassandra and I had to flee from Many Down House. It would have been unsuitable, of course, to stay under the roof with a man whose proposal I had accepted and then so stunningly rejected. Don't worry. He married, of course. His wife was an heiress who bore him 10 children and fulfilled everything expected of a country squire's wife. But know this, it was not a lack of opportunity that kept me unmarried. Though I know marriage is the driving force in most women's lives. But certainly Elizabeth Bennet's mother knew that. A mother of 5 daughters. Mrs. Bennet is a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. The business of her life is to get her daughters married. So what happens when she discovers that the nearby estate has been rented by a wealthy single young man? Her response goes something like this. My dear Mr. Bennet, have you heard the news? Netherfield Park is let at last. But it is. Mrs. Long has just been here and told me all about it. Do you not want to know who has taken it? Mr. Bennet, Mrs. Long says Netherfield has been taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England. He came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place. And he was so much taken with it, he is to take possession before Michaelmas. Some of his servants will be in the house next week. Single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, what a fine thing for our girls. Oh, Mr. Bennet, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of our girls. Indeed, it is very likely that he will fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must go and see him as soon as he comes into the neighborhood. But think of your daughters! Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Indeed, you must go and see him, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. Oh, Mr. Bennet, you delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my nerves. Oh, you do not know what I suffer. Indeed, it will be no use to us if 20 young men of 4,000 or 5,000 a year move into the neighborhood, as you will not go and visit them. None of you girls will ever get a husband, and I am sure I do not know who is to maintain you when your father is gone. I will not be able to keep you, and so I warn you. Don't keep coughing so, Kitty, for heaven's sake. Have a little compassion for my nerves. You tear them to pieces. Oh, if I could but see one of my daughters happily settled at Netherfield, and all the others equally well matched, I would have nothing left to wish for. I dearly love a laugh. I hope I never ridicule what is wise and good, but follies and nonsense, whims and inconsistencies do divert me. I laugh at them whenever I can. But I know marriage is a maneuvering business. For most women, it's an economic necessity. It's the only honorable provision for well-educated young women of small fortune. Elizabeth Bennet's best friend, Charlotte Lucas, knew that. Without thinking very highly either of men or marriage, marriage had always been Charlotte's object. She knew that single women have a dreadful propensity to poverty, which I suppose is one very good argument in favor of matrimony. When Elizabeth turns down a marriage proposal from the odious clergyman, Mr. Collins, and then Charlotte accepts it, well, let me show you. Let me show you how Charlotte explains it to Elizabeth. But why should you be surprised, Lizzie, that I should accept an offer of marriage from Mr. Collins? Do you think it incredible? He should be able to procure any woman's good opinion when he was not so happy as to succeed with you. I see what you are thinking. You must be surprised, very much surprised, so recently as Mr. Collins was wishing to marry you. But when you have had a chance to think it over, I think you'll be satisfied with what I've done. I'm not a romantic, you know. I never was. I ask only for a comfortable home. And considering Mr. Collins' character, connections, situation in life, I am convinced my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can ask. Happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. If the two parties are ever so well known to each other or ever so similar, it does not advance their happiness in the least. There will always be vexations and grief. They will always continue to grow apart. Therefore, it is best to know as little as possible about the person with whom you are to spend your life. Is it not? Charlotte, perhaps, is a bit too unromantic. Makes one long for a youthful mind. A young lady's imagination is very rapid. It will jump from admiration to love, and from love to matrimony in a heartbeat. Now, when I was young, I was mostly thinking of writing. I was always scribbling poems and stories in journals, mostly to read aloud to my family. Most of these are not worth remembering today. But it was my writing apprenticeship. My education consisted of a few months at boarding school until I caught typhus, and then about a year and a half at school later, and that ended because my parents couldn't afford to educate their daughters. What I did was to practice different styles in writing different stories. I don't believe I shall ever publish these, but let me give you an example. This is from a short story I was writing called The Three Sisters. I was practicing writing a novel in the epistolary form, telling the whole story only through letters. So this is a character named Mary writing a letter to her best friend, Fanny. My dear Fanny, I am the happiest creature in the world, for I have received an offer of marriage from Mr. Watts. It's the first one I've ever received, and I hardly know how to value it highly enough. How I will triumph over the Duttons. Now, I do not intend to accept it, at least I think not, but as I'm not quite sure, I gave him an equivocal answer, and I left. And now, Fanny, I want your advice as to whether I should accept him or not, but that you may be able to judge of his character and the situation of the affairs, I will give you an account of them. He is quite an old man. He's about 32, very plain, so plain I cannot bear to even look upon him. He's extremely disagreeable, and I hate him more than anyone else in the world. He has a large fortune, and I know he will make great settlements on me, but then he's very healthy. In short, I do not know just what to do. If I refuse him, he as good as told me he would offer himself to Sophia. And if she won't have him, to Georgiana. I could not bear to have my sisters married before me. But if I accept him, I know I'll be miserable all the rest of my life. He's very ill-tempered and peevish, extremely jealous, and so stingy there is no living in the house with him. I believe I will have him. It'll be such a triumph to be married before Sophie and Georgiana and the Duttons. And he promised to order a new carriage on the occasion. But we almost quarreled about the color, because I said it must be blue dotted with silver, and he said it must be plain chocolate brown. And then to provoke me more, he said it would be just as cheap as his old one. I won't have him, I tell you. He said he would come again tomorrow and receive my final answer. So I believe I must take him while I can. I know the Duttons will envy me, and then I shall be able to chaperone my sisters to all the winter balls. But then what is the good of that? It's extremely likely I will not be able to go myself, for I know he hates dancing. And what he hates, he has no idea of anyone else liking. And besides, he talks a great deal about women staying home and such stuff. I believe I shan't have him. I would refuse him at once, if I could be certain that neither of my sisters would have him. No, I cannot run such a risk. Therefore, if he will agree to order the new carriage exactly as I like, I will have him. I hope you like my determination. I can think of nothing better, and I am your ever affectionate Mary. There is something so amiable about the prejudices of a young mind. One is almost sorry to see young women grow up and adopt more adult approaches. And now, having said so much on that side of the marriage question, I shall turn around and remind you of the many female characters of mine who share the belief that anything is to be preferred, or indeed endured, rather than marrying without affection. I think Catherine Morland probably put it best in Northanger Abbey. She says at one point, if there is good fortune on one side, there can be no occasion for any on the other, no matter which has it, so that there is enough. I hate the idea of one great fortune looking out for another. And to marry for money, I think, is the wickedest thing in existence. My brother tried to sell Northanger Abbey back when I was unknown and unpublished. He found a publisher who accepted it, paid £10 for it, and never published it. My father had tried at almost the same time. 1797, he wrote to a publisher in London asking whether he wanted to publish a novel called First Impressions, later to become Pride and Prejudice. My dear sirs, I write to inquire whether you might consider publishing a manuscript novel comprised in 3 volumes about the length of Fanny Burney's Evelina at the author's financial risk. The publishers returned it, marked declined by return of post. They missed their chance, the fools. It would be 16 more years before Pride and Prejudice saw the light of day, which is why the first novel of mine to be published was Sense and Sensibility in 1811. What warm, what wild delight to see my words transformed into type. What is your definition of sensibility? Because in my day, it meant feeling, deep, passionate feeling, the very contradiction of sense. Marianne Dashwood is not only my youngest heroine, only 16. She is also the one most full of sensibility, eager in everything. Her joys, her sorrows can have no moderation. For Marianne, to love is to burn, to be on fire like Guinevere or Juliet. And to be jilted, well, when Marianne is jilted by her first great love, her reaction is something like this. Oh, Eleanor, I am miserable indeed. Leave me if I upset you. Leave me, hate me, forget me, but do not torture me so. Happy Eleanor, you can have no idea what I suffer. Oh, forgive me. I know you feel for me. I know what a heart you have. But yet you must be happy. Edward loves you. What could do away happiness like that? You can have no sorrow, and you will never know me otherwise. Mine is a misery that nothing can ever undo. Did he tell me he loved me? Yes. No. It was never openly declared, but it was every day implied. Engagement? No, there has been no engagement. He is not so unworthy as you think. He has broken no promises to me. And yet I felt myself as solemnly linked to him as if the strictest legal covenant bound us together. And he did feel the same way, Eleanor. For weeks and weeks he did. I know he did. Whatever else has changed him now, I was once as dear to him as my own soul could wish. That lock of hair, which he has sent back to me this morning, was begged of me with the most earnest supplication. Had you seen his face, his manner? Have you forgot the last evening we were together? The look on his face? No. I care not who knows that I am wretched. Misery such as mine has no pride. I must feel. I must be miserable. And they are welcome to enjoy it who can. Oh, but to appear happy when really I am so miserable. Who could require that? Poor Marianne, so young, so convinced that you fall in love once and once only. If you've read Sense and Sensibility, you know I did not marry Marianne to her first love. I married her to a very different man, Colonel Brandon. Still, despite what you might think from that, I do not oppose romance. I resist romantic mythology. Now, Emma. In Emma, I was determined to create a heroine whom no one but myself would much like. One who has her own way rather too often, and a disposition to think rather too well of herself. Emma's great love is matchmaking among all her family and friends. But since she is convinced only the deepest love will tempt her to the altar, she is destined to remain a spinster. At one point, her matchmaking scheme between her best friend Harriet and Mr. Elton falls apart, and poor Emma has to explain it to her former governess. Oh, Miss Taylor, Mrs. Weston, there has been an overthrow of everything that I had been hoping for Harriet and Mr. Elton. A development most unwelcome, most painful. Oh, dear, you will not believe me, but Mr. Elton is, now prepare yourself, Mr. Elton is in love with me. And the worst of it is, I persuaded her to care for him. Had I not done that, I could bear anything, but it was I and I alone. Oh, that poor girl. I just wish there was some way I could soften the news when I tell her. No. I sought to bring two people together, and I will never do so again. Never. Yes. Well done, Emma. I just wish there was some way I could soften the blow. Harriet, I have some news about Mr. Elton. While expressing his fervent admiration for you as a person, it is unhappily I who have captured his fancy. Naturally, I do not return his affection, but that does not make it any more of an embarrassment. I place the responsibility directly upon my own shoulders. Oh, don't worry about me. I will never marry. Do not worry. I will not be a poor old lady. It's poverty, you know, that makes celibacy contemptible to a generous public. A single woman with a very narrow income must be a ridiculous, disagreeable old maid, the proper sport of boys and girls. But a single woman of large fortune is always agreeable and may be as pleasant and respectable as anyone else. What shall I do? How will I occupy myself as I grow old? If I know myself, Harriet, mine is an active, busy mind with a good many independent resources. I do not see why I should be any more in want of employment at 40 or 50 than I am at 1 and 20. Women's usual occupations will be as open to me then as they are now. If I draw less, I shall read more. If I give up music, I shall take to carpet work. As for objects of affection, which is the real danger to be avoided in not marrying, I shall be very well off with all the children of a sister I love so much to care about. There will be enough of them in all probability, enough for every hope and every fear. And though my attachment to none can equal that of a parent, it suits my idea of happiness better. My nieces and nephews. I think, as I grow older, I think I will often have a niece with me at all times. I myself currently have 33 nieces and nephews. It's the disposition to love. If you have that, there are many in the world who can fill it. But not everyone has it, you know, a loving heart. In life, as in novels, people marry for the wrong reasons. They are young and flush with romance, and they choose the wrong person, as I fear Mr. Bennet did. Or they follow the rules and dictates of an antiquated society, which is, of course, the route recommended by Mr. Darcy's imperious aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. When Lady Catherine hears a rumor that her nephew, Mr. Darcy, might actually become engaged to Elizabeth Bennet, she immediately determines to go and find out the truth. You can be at no loss to understand the reason for my journey, Miss Bennet. A report of a most alarming nature reached me the other day. I was told not only that your sister was to be most advantageously married, but that you, Miss Eliza Bennet, would be soon afterward united to my nephew, Mr. Darcy. So I know it must be a scandalous falsehood. I determined to come at once to insist upon having such a report universally contradicted. This is not to be borne. Miss Bennet, do you know who I am? I am almost the nearest relation he has, and I am entitled to know all his nearest concerns. Let me make one thing plain. Mr. Darcy is engaged to my daughter. The engagement between them is of a peculiar kind. From their infancy, they were intended for each other. It was the favorite wish of his mother as well as hers. And now, to be prevented by the upstart pretensions of a young girl without family, connections, or fortune? Is this to be endured? It shall not be. Your alliance would be a disgrace. Obstinate, headstrong girl. Who was your mother, your uncles and aunts? Do not imagine me ignorant of their condition. Not so hasty, if you please. I have a further objection. Your youngest sister's infamous elopement. Oh, I know it all. Is such a girl to be the sister-in-law of my nephew? Are the shades of his estate at Pemberley to be thus polluted? You have no regard, then, for the honor and credit of my nephew. You are determined to ruin him, to make him the ridicule of all the land. Very well, then. I shall know how to act. I take no leave of you, Miss Bennet. I said no regards to your mother. You deserve no such attentions. I am most seriously displeased. I do not like all my characters to be agreeable, because it then saves me the trouble of liking them, especially when they lack a loving heart. I wonder sometimes why people never ask the bigger question. Not, why did I never marry, or was I ever in love? The real question is how a person who is capable of love, who has a loving heart, can be so unlucky in love. Anne Elliot, in Persuasion. When Anne was 20, she had been persuaded to give up Captain Wentworth, the man that she loved. Now, 8 years later, she realizes the depth of her esteem and respect for him, but it's too late. As she explains it to his friend, Captain Harville. We do not forget you so soon as you forgive us. It is perhaps our fate rather than our merit. We live at home, quiet, confined, and our feelings prey on us. You are always traveling, pulled into business, pursuits, action of some kind, and constant occupation soon weakens emotions. Your feelings may be strongest, but ours are the most tender. You are always laboring and toiling, neither time nor health nor life to be called your own. It would be hard indeed if a woman's feelings were added to all that. I hope I do justice by you, and to all who resemble you. I would deserve utter contempt if I dared to suppose that true attachment and constancy were known only to woman. No. I believe you capable of everything great and good in your married lives. I believe you equal to every important exertion. So long as the woman you love lives, and lives for you. The only privilege that I would claim for my own sex, and it's not an enviable one, you need not covet it, is that of loving longest when all hope is gone. If you've read Persuasion, you know I gave Anne Elliot a second chance to make her decision again, rejecting fantasy and the cynicism of calculation. That is the real freedom. That is how you lift yourself above cliches. Second chances. When I was 20, same year Anne Elliot was when she fell in love with Captain Wentworth, I fell in love myself. I wrote to Cassandra in this rush of high spirits. Dear Cassandra, I am almost afraid to tell you how my Irish friend and I behaved. Imagine to yourself everything most profligate and shocking in the way of dancing and sitting down together. I can expose myself, however, only once more, because he leaves the country soon. He's a very gentlemanlike, good-looking, pleasant young man, I assure you. He has only one fault. It is that his morning coat is too light in color. The Irish friend was Tom Lefroy, nephew of family friends of ours. He was visiting his cousins at their home, not far from our house in Steventon. Our romance flared up quickly enough. 3 evenings of dancing and flirting. I was flattered by his interest, his flirtatious appeal. I wrote again to Cassandra. Dear Cassandra, the ball is to be held tomorrow. I look forward to it with great impatience, as I rather expect to receive an offer from my friend in the course of the evening. I shall refuse, however, unless he promises to give away his white coat. However, it was not to be. His family took stock of the situation and put an end to it. His mother sent him away post-haste before any more mischief could be done. It must have seemed to them a very imprudent course. The penniless daughter of a clergyman? They expected him to marry well, and he did. He married an heiress with a great fortune. It was, for us, rather like the classic comic plot. A powerful blocking figure swoops in and keeps the young lovers apart until they get their second chance. Only for me, there would be no second chance. Which is why I was so determined Elizabeth Bennet get her second chance. Her obstacle is internal. She stands in the way of her own happiness. Her second chance comes when she puts aside her own prejudice. Mr. Darcy proposes again, and she accepts. And then she must explain to her sister how she could possibly accept this man. No, I am not deceived. deceiving you, Jane. I am engaged to Mr. Darcy, even if you do know it to be impossible. Oh, this is a wretched beginning indeed. My sole dependence was on you. I'm sure no one else will believe me if you do not. Yet indeed I am in earnest. He still loves me, and we are engaged. No, I do not dislike him as I did. Oh, when I think how despicably I acted towards him. I, who have always prided myself on my discernment. I, who have always valued my insight. How humiliating it was to discover how wrong I had been. But how just a humiliation. But vanity, not love, was my folly. It is already settled between us. We are to be the happiest couple in the world. How long have I loved him? It's been coming on so gradually, I hardly know when it first began, but I believe I must date it to when I first saw his beautiful grounds at Pemberley. It is hard to separate life from fiction, but not that hard. Elizabeth Bennet is delightful, but she's not me. Nor is Emma or Marianne or Anne Elliot or any of my other characters. My characters are not me. They are mirrors of aspects of me. This is what novelists do. We blend observation with imagination. I took the clay of everyday life and breathed new life into it. The most important thing in a woman's life, it's not great romance and love, nor is it wealth and social status. It is not really about marriage at all. Not really. The most important thing in a woman's life is to be open to love. So no, I never married. But that is not to say I did not have love and children. And many more than 8 or 10. I had dozens. Their names are Anne Elliot, and Marianne and Eleanor Dashwood, and Catherine Morland, and Captain Wentworth, and Mr. Collins, and Elizabeth, and Mr. Darcy. They are not long-lived. They are ageless. Had I married, I might have been wealthy. I might have been happy. I might have been a mother and lived a very long life. I might have been all of those things. But I would not have been Jane Austen. Therefore, I will finish by telling all of you, my name is Jane Austen. And that ought to tell you everything you need to know. Thank you so much, and good night.